He had the round glasses, the boyish grin, and a voice that sounded like sunshine. John Denver was more than a musician, he was a phenomenon. His songs, like Take Me Home, Country Roads, weren't just hits, they were anthems for a simpler, purer America. But behind that gentle, nature-loving image was a man tormented by dark impulses. His own wife, Annie, would later confirm the rumors, detailing a shocking incident of rage involving a chainsaw and their marital bed. The story of the man who sang "Sunshine on My Shoulders" is far darker and more tragic than you've ever been told. Section 1, Building the Golden Boy. In the early 1970s, John Denver wasn't just on the rise, he was a rocket. He exploded onto a scene filled with heavy rock and cynical protest songs, offering something radically different, pure, unfiltered optimism. He wasn't just singing about nature, he was nature. His music became the soundtrack for anyone who longed to escape the city and breathe clean mountain air. Songs like "Sunshine on My Shoulders" and "Rocky Mountain High" made him the official poster boy for the bright side of the counterculture. He was wholesome, he was safe, and the world absolutely adored him for it. But the first crack in that perfect public image appeared almost immediately. Radio stations across the country began banning "Rocky Mountain High," convinced that this clean-cut, all-American singer was secretly promoting drug use with the line "Friends around the campfire and everybody's high." John was stunned. He was forced to go on the defensive, publicly testifying that the song was about the innocent, natural euphoria of the mountains, not about getting wasted. It was his first taste of how quickly the world could twist his words, and the first sign that the golden boy image might be a cage he was building for himself. Section 2, The Fairy Tale Muse, Annie's Song. At the very center of this wholesome new empire was his muse, Annie Martel. Theirs was the decades-defining love story. She was the college student from Minnesota who grounded the lonely songwriter, and he was the rising star who adored her. The entire world was invited to witness their perfect romance through his music, and one song, in particular, cemented their status as a folk music fairy tale. The story became legendary. John was on a ski lift in Aspen, overwhelmed by the beauty of the mountains and his love for his wife, and in just 10 minutes, Annie's song poured out of him, fully formed. With lines like, "You fill up my senses," it was a flawless expression of devotion. The song became a global anthem for romance, played at countless weddings and celebrated as proof of their perfect union. But what the public didn't know was the darkness creeping in just outside the frame. As Annie herself would reveal years later, the song wasn't just a snapshot of a perfect love. It was a desperate wish for a peace and connection that they were already beginning to lose. Section 3, The Mask Begins to Slip. That fairy tale, however, was beginning to crumble under the immense weight of fame. The pressure to be John Denver 24/7, that smiling, gentle, perfect man, was becoming a crushing burden. The more famous he became, the more he felt trapped inside the persona he had created. He wasn't just a husband anymore, he was a global superstar, and the man Annie had married was disappearing. Behind closed doors, his need for optimism in public was matched by a growing darkness and a desperate need for control. He wasn't just a nature lover, he became a man who reportedly micromanaged every aspect of their home life. But the most significant betrayal was yet to come. As he toured the world, his infidelities began, shattering the very foundation of the love he'd immortalized in song. He later admitted to being unfaithful, a confession that created a toxic, volatile environment at home that was the absolute opposite of the peaceful world his music promised. Section 4, The Chainsaw and the Divorce. The breaking point was inevitable, and when it arrived, it was violent and shocking. After years of living with the infidelity and controlling rages, Annie finally asked for a divorce. John did not take the news well. He reportedly flew into a fury, but the worst was yet to come. According to the story she later confirmed, John returned to their Aspen home, not to talk, not to reconcile, but to destroy the very symbols of their life together. He didn't just yell, he grabbed a chainsaw. In a fit of rage, the man who sang "Sunshine on My Shoulders" revved the engine and began physically sawing their marital bed, the bed that represented their entire relationship, into pieces. The incident was terrifying. It was the definitive, horrifying end to the Annie's song fairy tale. The public would eventually hear whispers, but the sheer violence of the act, the chainsaw-wielding golden boy, was a truth so dark it was almost unbelievable. Section 5, The Downward Spiral. After the divorce, the "sunshine" image was officially shattered, and John Denver's life began to publicly unravel. His career, which had once been unstoppable, stalled. The optimistic folk pop that made him a superstar felt out of place in the new era of MTV, and his attempts to adapt were met with a shrug. He married again, to Australian actress Cassandra Delaney, but that relationship quickly became just as volatile and toxic as his first, ending in another bitter divorce. But it was his behavior offstage that truly signaled his downward spiral. The private struggles with alcohol became undeniably public when he was arrested for driving under the influence. Then, he was arrested again. The wholesome, smiling face that had graced album covers was replaced by the stark, humiliating reality of police mugshots. The public no longer saw the beloved musician, they saw a man who had lost control. Section 6, grounded and forbidden to fly, those DUI arrests weren't just a public relations nightmare, they had devastating real-world consequences. For a man who wrote songs like Leaving on a Jet Plane and who used flight as his ultimate metaphor for freedom, his pilot's license was more than a piece of paper, it was his identity. After his arrests, the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, took decisive action. John Denver, the man who sang about soaring over the Rockies, was officially and publicly grounded. The FAA revoked his pilot's license, citing his inability to abstain from alcohol. It was the ultimate humiliation, a professional and personal catastrophe. He was legally forbidden from doing the one thing that he felt defined his spirit, a punishment that must have felt like a cage for a man who spent his life chasing the sky. Section 7, the final, illegal flight. On October 12, 1997, John Denver was a man who was not legally allowed to be in a cockpit. But his obsession with flying was stronger than his regard for the law. He had recently purchased a new, experimental, amateur-built aircraft. It was a model known to be lightweight and agile, but its design was also unconventional, particularly the placement of the fuel tank switch, which was located behind the pilot's left shoulder, making it incredibly difficult to reach in flight. Despite being legally grounded and despite his inexperience with this specific, quirky aircraft, Denver decided to take it for a flight over Monterey Bay. He took off, and in a tragic, final irony, the man who sang about soaring through the skies was taken by it. Investigators believe that while trying to switch fuel tanks, he lost control of the plane and plummeted into the ocean. It was a shocking, sudden end. But the most haunting part of the tragedy wasn't just the crash, it was the fact that it should never have happened. His death was the final, fatal consequence of a life spent pushing past boundaries, whether they were marital, legal, or physical. Conclusion, the man versus the music. So how do we reconcile the two John Denvers? There is the gentle, soaring voice who gave us Annie's Song and Rocky Mountain High, the man who became a symbol of love and nature. And then there is the man behind the music, the volatile, unfaithful husband who used a chainsaw to destroy his marital bed and the grounded pilot who took one last, illegal flight. The truth is, his music was never a biography, it was a fantasy. It was a beautiful, perfect world he wished he could live in, a stark contrast to the chaotic and tormented one he actually created for himself and those around him. Perhaps the reason the songs endure, the reason we still play them, is because we, like him, want to believe in that simple, sunny world. We want to believe that the man singing about the sunshine really felt it, even when his life was filled with so much darkness.